Hello, it's Amy. I'm sitting here digging into these tiny little volumes. There's two volumes here. I'll just show you the one because the other one's next to me and I'm holding the phone here with my hand. But I'm digging into these little volumes of the familiar letters of James Howell. Now, I purchased these two volumes because they had been mentioned in an Agnes Repplier essay that I'd read recently. I actually read it aloud here on the channel in the dozy hours. And I can see where she got the idea for the essay now because the introduction to these editions from the 1890s include sort of that exact phrase about reaching for the authors at your bedside in the dozy hour. And the writer of the introductions here, I don't think he's specifically named. Perhaps it's the David Stott that's on the side of the book here. But the author of the introduction says that he reaches for James Howell and Montaigne in those dozy hours. And I didn't know anything about James Howell. But in a matter of minutes here, reading the introduction, I've discovered that he was a civil servant and then a politician in 17th century England. And he died in 1666. And so it's funny, it sort of overlaps with my reading of the Diary of Samuel Pepys. So it goes along quite well with that. And these letters are not something that I'm going to read straight through as I'm doing with the Diary of Samuel Pepys. I think there's something that I'll reach for, a little bit at a time. But I thought I would just take a little pause here and read to you one of his first letters, or rather the first letter in these editions here. And I'm not quite sure whether these are abridged or not, whether there's more letters. There very well could be. In fact, I would probably guess there are, because in the introduction they do talk about the publishing of several volumes. And I can't imagine all the letters would fit in two tiny books of this size, but he's dedicated these letters to King Charles I, perhaps with some political motivations. And they do, he says in his little dedication that the letters do cover some of the events of Charles I's reign. But I like this first one because it's about the format of the letter. So this is what he writes to Sir J.S. at Leeds Castle. Sir, it was a quaint difference the ancients did put twixt a letter and an oration, that the one should be attired like a woman, the other like a man. The latter of the two is allowed large side robes as long periods, parentheses, similes, examples, and other parts of rhetorical flourishes. But a letter or epistle should be short-coated and closely couched. A hungerlin, and we have a footnote here that says a hungerlin was a short furred coat, so called from its Hungarian origin. A hungerlin becomes a letter more handsomely than a gown. Indeed, and we'll flip the page here. Indeed, we should write as we speak. And that's a true familiar letter which expresseth one's mind, as if he were discoursing with the party to whom he writes, in succinct and short terms. The tongue and the pen are both of them interpreters of the mind. But I hold the pen to be the more faithful of the two. The tongue, in undue position, being seated in a moist, slippery place, may fail and falter in her sullen, exemplar expressions, but the pen, having a greater advantage of premeditation, is not so subject to error, and leaves things behind it upon firm and authentic record. Now letters, though they be capable of any subject, yet commonly they are either narratory, abrogatory, consolatory, monitory, or congratulatory. The first consists of relations, the second of reprehensions, the third of comfort, and the last two of counsel and joy. There are some who, in lieu of letters, write homilies. They preach when they should epistolize. There are others that turn them to tedious tractates. This is to make letters degenerate from their true nature. Some modern authors, there are who have exposed their letters to the world, have most of them, I mean among your Latin epistolizers, go freighted with mere Bartholomew ware, with trite and trivial phrases only, listed with pedantic shreds of schoolboy verses. Others there are among our next transmarine neighbors eastward, who write in their own language, but their style is so soft and easy that their letters may be said to be like bodies of loose flesh without sinews. They have neither joints of art nor arteries in them, and they have a kind of simpering and lank hectic expressions made up of a bombast of words and finical affected compliments only. I cannot well away with such sleazy stuff, with such cobweb compositions, where there is no strength of matter, nothing for the reader to carry away with him that may enlarge the notions of his soul. One shall hardly find an apothegm, example, simile, or any thing of philosophy, history, or solid knowledge, or as much as one new created phrase in 100 of them, and to draw any observations out of them were as if one went about to distill cream out of froth, insomuch that it may be said of them, what was said of the echo, that she is a mere sound and nothing else. I return you your Balzac, and there's a note here, so keeping in mind that this is before the Honoré de Balzac that we know, this is the Balzac Senior. Balzac, and the footnote here says the familiar letters of Jean L.G. de Balzac. So that is a different Balzac, obviously. I return you your Balzac by this bearer. And when I found those letters, wherein he is so familiar with his king, so flat, and those of Richelieu, so puffed with profane hyperboles, and larded up and down with such gross flatteries, with others besides which he sends up and down the world for discovery of the crazy condition of his body, I forbore him farther. So I am your most affectionate servitor. J.H. Westminster, 25 July, 1625. And so that is more of a letter that is framing how he's intending to portray the rest of the letters in this volume. Now, some of the letters could, of course, be actual letters that he wrote to people at various stages in his life. But as it's theorized in the introduction here, some of these letters are likely things that he reproduced from memory specifically for this volume. And certainly this first one seems to have been written with the book in mind. It's as though, even though he's writing to someone else, it's as though he is writing to his king in a letter and comparing himself to, a French author who also published letters and did a similar thing. But of course, now my curiosity is piqued, and I do wonder about the letters by this Balzac Senior, written, I would assume, probably shortly before Howell himself is writing, so sometime in the 17th century, perhaps a little earlier in the 16th century. But my interest is piqued enough that I may investigate that at some point. But I think that's enough for now. So we've got these cute little volumes, letters, and a nice tie into the same era as the Diary of Samuel Pepys. And just an update on that, the entire set has arrived, with the exception of my volume 4. And that's because, or not my volume 4, my volume 6, with the exception of volume 6. And that's because a seller mistakenly sent me volume 8 when I had ordered volume 6 from them. And so I've ended up with 2 copies of volume 8 and no volume 6. And I had to reorder that volume 6 from another seller because the seller that sent me the wrong one, it turned out they did not have volume 6 to send at all. But at least they were very kind about it and took care of their mistake by just, simply refunding me and not expecting me to send the incorrect book back. Especially when I looked it up and I was like, it would cost me upwards of 32 Canadian dollars to send that book back. When it had, supposedly it cost them $9 to send it to me. That's the shipping cost I paid. Whether it did cost them that or not, I don't know, but I was just pleased that they took care of their mistake in an honest and in a reasonable way. That was a little inconvenience to me. And so I've got the 2 volumes of the volume 8, waiting for my volume 6, and I'm about a third of the way into reading volume 1 of the diary and really, really enjoying that. So yeah, and I guess that's all for today.